Hi, I'm Dave Bond, and this is a Code Sherpa's Trail Guide on using gitflow. First, I have a confession. For years, I was a Subversion user, and when I first started using Git, I used it like Subversion with an extra staging area. I was afraid of branches. I mean, isn't every Subversion user? When I first started dabbling with branches, I really couldn't figure out why everyone thought it was so much better. The conflicts, I'd end up in these weird states with detached heads, I'd have problems with local versus remote tracking. It all just seemed more difficult than it had to be. If you came from Subversion, you probably know just what I'm talking about. Maybe you're still a Git novice, in which case you're really going to like what you're about to see. Maybe you're a Git intermediate and you still reference a cheat sheet that shows you how to push a local branch and set it up for tracking. I think you're in the sweet spot for using gitflow. And maybe you're a Git expert, in which case you might think what you're about to see is a little limiting. And while I might agree, let me get on a soapbox here for a second. I've come to think of Git as not a version control tool, but as a series of ingredients with which you can build a complete configuration management process. And all processes are about constraining what is possible. Seriously, any process you look at is about taking the world of possibilities and reducing it to a smaller set that's easier to learn and has more predictable touch points for humans to interact with it. gitflow is no different. It takes a world of possibilities you can do with normal Git command line and creates some higher level abstractions that make things easier. There can be a lot of benefit here to a team, but your mileage may vary. But gitflow isn't really in your way. Git is still there, and you can still do everything you might want to do from the command line. So what is gitflow? Simply put, it's a series of naming and branching conventions used with Git to enforce a team-wide process for handling development branches, releasing, and supporting production code. Just a little over a year ago, Vincent Dreesen published this blog post describing the processes his team used. This wasn't necessarily a unique process at the time. A lot of what he writes about you can find in Git books and other blog entries, but to his credit, he described it very well, and he also took it to the next level with a Git project that helped define and enforce the concepts. This is the gitflow homepage on GitHub. The project is a series of extensions to Git that enforce the model he describes in his blog. Today we'll be looking at the methodology as well as this tool, and we'll use it on a real-world project. And finally, there's the testimonial blogs. Jeff Kreeftmeijer wrote this blog entry, which is the one that finally got me over the intimidation of the diagram in the original blog entry, and it got me using gitflow. Thanks, Jeff. So today we're going to use gitflow. We'll install it on my Mac, and we're going to start a new Rails 3 project, put it on GitHub, and use gitflow to support branches for development, release, production, and hotfixes. So this is the project we're going to be working on today. About 18 months ago, I took my website down for a redesign, got this far, and never really got it back up. This is a Rails 2.3.5 project, and it's stored in Subversion, and I'm basically going to just blow it away, start fresh with a Rails 3 project in GitHub, and copy over the CSS and image assets. So that's where we're going to start. Let's come over to a command line, where the first thing I need to do is install gitflow. Now, on my Mac, I use Brew. If you're on something other than a Mac, or if you use some other package management system or want to install from source, it's all a piece of cake. And gitflow is now installed. So let's start our Rails project. I'm going to say Rails, new, Dave Bach, www. I'm going to cd down into that. And then I'm going to create an RVMRC file. If you're not familiar with the Ruby Version Manager, check out a future screencast or look online. That's not something I'm going to go into today. And then I'm going to initialize Git, because that's what we're going to start storing this in. And then I'm going to make a small modification to my git ignore file to also ignore, because that's how I roll. Okay. Now I'm going to git add pretty much everything and git commit. We will say initial commit, and there we go. Now I'm going to push that up to GitHub, and now that we're up on GitHub, we can start talking about what we're going to do with gitflow. So let's say git branch just to see where we are. Surprise, surprise, we have a master. So now starting to use gitflow, I'm going to say git flow init, and it's going to ask me a few questions. What do we want the production release branch name to be? That's going to be master. We can change these conventions. I wouldn't recommend it to start just because you look for help online and people are talking about these in terms of the default conventions. Branch name for our next release development, that's going to be develop. Whenever we have feature branches, they're going to be prefixed with feature slash, and release slash, and hotfix slash, and support slash. We'll go into most of those today. And we're done. So where are we? We've initialized Git, we've checked our project in, we've pushed it up to GitHub, and we've initialized gitflow. Let's take a look at what branches we have. We have a develop and a master. Now develop is where we're going to be doing most of our work, but we have not pushed that to GitHub yet. This is still something we have to do a little bit manually. So I'm going to push origin to develop, and then I'm going to set the remote tracking branch for that. So now whenever we take a look at GitHub, it will have that branch. In fact, let's go do that. Here was my new GitHub project. We'll continue. And we'll see we have our default project. We have a develop and a master branch. I'm going to come back to the command line. And now I'm going to do a little bit of work on my Rails project. I'll be back when I have some stuff to commit. Okay, we're back, and we have a little bit of stuff here to commit. I'm using a free CSS library called FreshScent, and I have the CSS and the images. And if you notice, I had replaced one of the images earlier with my own mug, so that's part of this. Let's go ahead and commit that. Bunch of new files. I'm on the develop branch. Okay, so part of the methodology here is that the master branch is always code that's ready for production, and developers are developing on the develop branch. So that's what I'm about to do. I'm going to commit this stuff to the develop branch. And just so everybody up on GitHub can see what I'm doing, it's now pushed up there. So if this sits a little odd with you that I'm not committing to master, well, first realize that in Git, unlike other version control repositories, the name of the branch is no special meaning. Master is not some special place. It's just the name of a branch. That really could have been called anything. The convention to have that always production ready, well, that's a nice convention to have. I can live with that. If I can't live with that, we can change it when we first do the git init. Towards the end, I'll talk about why that can be a little bit of a painful thing to do. Okay, so I have my CSS committed, and I'm going to pause, go do some other work, and I will come back when we have some more stuff to check in. And we're back, and I've done a little bit of work while we've been gone. So I have a few new files and a few modified files, basically copying over some boilerplate from the old application. I'm still in my develop branch. Let's go ahead and commit this stuff. And I'm going to push that up to GitHub for the world to see. I want to do something a little bit different here. We're now about to start modifying the app in a meaningful way. And rather than just checking stuff into develop, I'm actually going to use gitflow to create what's called a feature branch. Let's take a look at that. If I just type gitflow, it gives me a few of the available subcommands. Gitflow feature tells me I can create a new feature branch. Now this is something you can do in Git. This isn't a big deal, but it's kind of nice to have this as an easy to use convention. Let's say gitflow feature start pages controller. So I've created a new feature branch and it switched me to it. If I take a look at git branch, we see we have our master, we have our develop, and we have the feature branch that I'm currently on. Let's go ahead and generate a controller. That's going to create a bunch of stuff for us here. And I'm going to remove the public index file that we no longer need. So all that's ready to go. Okay, let's fire this up and see what we have. Rails server. And we can see running here at localhost 3000, I have my little app with all my scaffolding. Okay, great. I have an app that's ready to go. Okay, so let's check our Git status again. We can see all that's checked in, but git branch-a, we see that that feature pages controller is a local branch. If I want to share that with people I'm working with, what do I do? Well, if I'm using standard Git, I can push that up to origin, and then I have to set up my remote tracking branch and all that business. But with gitflow, we can do something really easy here. I can say gitflow flow, and what are my options? Feature, and it tells me, hey, I have a feature branch here. That's the one I'm currently on. Git flow feature publish. Pages controller. So check that out. It pushed it up to GitHub and made this a local tracking branch. So if other people check stuff in now, it will track. Just to confirm that, come to GitHub, refresh, and what do we see? We see develop, our feature branch, and our master branch. So everything's looking pretty good here, huh? Okay, so let's go back to our project. And I'm going to say git flow feature finish pages controller. And this branch that I'm on for this feature is going to merge and go away. I'm no longer on that branch. I'm now back on the develop branch. That's just a standard merge, nothing fancy. If there were conflicts, I'd have to handle them the same way we normally do. But that was a feature branch. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? So what did we just do? When we initialized gitflow, we created a develop branch off of our master branch, which contained nothing but the skeleton project in it. We then made several commits directly onto develop of just some of our boilerplate stuff. We then created a feature branch, which is represented by the pink circles there. We did several check-ins on that feature branch, and then we merged it back into the develop branch. That was a pretty simple operation, but while we were doing that, another developer could have been adding stuff to the develop branch. In fact, we could have had several feature branches going on at the same time. We might have potential merge conflicts to reserve, but that's par for the course in dealing with Git. Nothing new there. Notice that the master branch was completely untouched by any of these operations. So all this work has been happening on the develop branch. How do we get that back to master? That is what our next topic is about. So let's talk about release branches. If I say git flow release, what do we get? We get a little bit of help that looks just like the help for our feature branch. So let's git flow release start initial deploy. Right, it's not quite done, but we want to get our deploy working out to a production server, test things out. Just like before, it has created a new branch for us. So what is this branch for? This is where we might bump our version number. This might be where we deploy to an integration server, where we're going to test some stuff out. In fact, let's go ahead and edit our README. Clear that out. This is the initial version of my new website. Git add the README. Git commit initial version README. So I have my branch here, and it has one small local change. And now I'm ready to finish this release. And I say git flow release finish initial deploy. This is going to do two things for us. Oh, it is opening a little tag message for me. Bring that over onto this window. It's saying, hey, write a tag message. I'm saying, this is our initial release. Not quite production, but hey, we need to shake down the deploy process. So it's updated my README, and it's done several things here. It's made sure it's gotten the latest from the origin. The release branch has been merged into master. The release was tagged initial deploy, and the release branch was also merged back into develop. There's a lot going on there. Let's look at this. So visually, this is what we've done. We created a release branch, and that gave us space to do whatever was necessary to prep for the release. We might have bumped a version number, we might have deployed to an integration server, we might have fixed some issues. In our case, we just updated a README. When we were done, we finished the release, and gitflow automatically merged what we did both to the branch of our master, where it can now be shared with the world as a production release, it was tagged with the name of this release branch, and it was merged back to develop, so that the developers are now working with the latest stuff. Notice that once we're done, the release branch is gone. This might seem a little strange at first. How do we support versioned releases when we don't have a branch for that version? Well, this is what the master branch is for, and that's also what the notion of hotfixes and support branches are about. When we're done, the master has a tag that was the version as of this release name. We can always get back to that. Okay, so we're back in code, and everything's clean, and we're back on our develop branch. So let's talk about hotfixes. Hotfixes are the branch concept we need to be able to support changes to the production site without interfering stuff that's in development. So in order to do that, let's actually have some stuff in development. Let's do a git flow feature start, and we're going to call this blog sidebar. If you notice, the original site had a little bit of information off of our corporate blog with our most recent entries on it. Let's go and get that functionality out of the old site and start putting it here. I'm going to go get that code, and I'll be back when I'm done. So I've been busy at work on my blog functionality, and you can see I have a new model, I have some new migrations, a couple tests, made a change to the generic sidebar for the HTML. Obviously I have some changes here that are not ready to get into production, which is why they're off on my sidebar branch. Let's go ahead and commit these. -m initial work on my blog sidebar. And I find out that there's a typo in the production site. I'm not sure what happened, but let's go take a look at that. And sure enough, oh my gosh, DaveBork.com, that's not right. We want to go fix that. So I could fix that in the code right here, but I'm off on my branch. I could go over to the master branch, but then I have something that I need to cherry pick to get back over into my develop branch. So what can we do? Well, this is what a hotfix is all about. Let's go ahead and do that. So we are going to create a hotfix branch to deal with this typo problem. So I'm going to say git flow hotfix start typo fix. And that has switched us to a new branch. Let's check that out. Git branch. Notice I'm now on hotfix/typofix. My feature/blog sidebar is still tucked neatly away, and my develop and master branches are still there too. So let's go and find this offending file. Vim app views layouts application, and I've already done my research and found it's right here. DaveBork.com and DaveBork. That's not right. And so the first thing we'll do is fix that one. Come back over here and fix that one. Okay, so where are we? We have our modified file, git add app views layouts application, and git commit -m, fixing the Bork typo, no pun intended. Okay, so my hotfix is ready. How do I do this? Git flow hotfix finish typo fix. Write a tag message. Fixing the typo that somehow made it into production. Okay, a few things just happened. It got everything from origin. It tagged our hotfix. It updated both master and the develop branch with our hotfix. So a lot like a release, it updated two things. So this is how a hotfix works. We have our master that has been in production, and we have a develop branch going on. In fact, in our case, we also had a feature branch going on as well. We found a typo. We created a hotfix. It does this off of master. We made our change, and when we finish that hotfix branch, it gets merged back into master and into develop. So our change is over there as well. We can now come back to our code. Let's push that up. Let's check out our branches. and we can come back to our feature blog sidebar. We can work uninterrupted on our sidebar, knowing that we were able to support an emergency fix out to production. We've looked at a lot of the different features of gitflow. We've looked at creating the develop branch and master branch with the initialization. We've looked at creating feature branches and merging those back in. We've looked at release branches and how they're short-lived and how the changes get pushed back into master and develop. And we've looked at hotfixes off of the master where we can fix something and that gets pushed back to master and develop as well. So this initial diagram that was part of Vincent's blog really isn't as daunting as it first seems. It's just a lot of concepts overlapping, concepts that we can really use to support a lot of different workflow situations that we're going to run into. So what's not to like about gitflow? Well, earlier I mentioned how I recommended that you should just accept the defaults and not try to change them. There's a reason behind that, and that's every user has to type gitflow init into their local repository. If you find a project up on GitHub that's using gitflow and you check it out, you're going to have to use gitflow init on your local repo if you intend to follow the same branching naming conventions and patterns that they're using. If they've overridden the defaults, you're going to have to know what those defaults are and remember to type them in when you do that gitflow init. If this were a one-time thing, I might recommend not using the defaults in certain situations. But since every user has to do the same thing, I think that accepting those defaults is probably the safest thing to do. If you're using gitflow, it's one more thing to install and worry about. If you have a lot of configuration details, if you have a lot of people who are experts in Git already, then maybe that's one more thing you don't have to worry about. And finally, those conventions aren't enforced. If somebody checks out the repo and they don't use those same conventions, there's nothing to stop them from checking into master. There's nothing to stop them from naming a branch something different. It's a great system, but everybody has to play along. It's cooperative. Here are the links to the sites that we've been looking at while we've been watching this screencast. The blog entry that started it all by Vincent Dreesen. The project that makes it possible up on GitHub, the gitflow thing that we installed at the beginning that gives us the command line tools, and the testimonial that convinced me. And right now you're listening to my theme music from danosongs.com. Dano has released a bunch of music under a royalty-free license. All you have to do is mention him in your credits. So thanks, Dano. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, keep an eye out for other On the Path screencasts coming from Code Sherpas. You can also find us occasionally hosting the Ruby 5 podcast, helping to organize the Ruby Nation conference, and writing awesome code. Thanks a lot.